Hey, good morning, Sujit. How are you today?
Good, Jeff. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for joining me today. Again, I'm Jeff Andrea, Business Development Manager here at Arkiva. I'm joined by Sujit Singh, the COO of Arkiva here today. Sujit's one of our resident experts on S&OP, and he's joined me for step five, implementing S&OP. We have in this five-part series, we've gone through uh, step one, understanding customer demand. Step two, analyze your inventory. Step three, routinely create a demand plan. Step four, balance supply and demand. And today, Sujit, we're here to talk about implementing S&OP. So thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yep. Anytime during the today's discussion, you can just follow the QR code that's on your screen. It'll take you to additional information regarding S&OP and Arkiva. And if you have any questions that you want to add to this discussion, we'll be picking up questions at the end of our talk, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. So thanks again. Sujit, one question. Let's start with S&OP implementation and why it's so important.
Yeah, great question. I think when we talk about any company, they probably have a long term vision of what they want to do, how they want to change the world in some cases, or, how when they grow up, what do they want to be looked at as. So that typically is a strategic vision where they have they have their own ideas about what they want to do in this world. And then if you look at the day to day, you are dealing with the customers, you're dealing with the orders as they come in, you're dealing with the breakdown in your machines, maybe you have labor issues, so you have your day to day. So you have
Right.
the long term, which is very strategic, very directional. You have the short term, which is totally driven by the events that may be going on. Very, very, you could almost call it, it has a firefighting kind of a mindset.
Right.
So, how do you run the operation in the here and now in a way that it's still aligned with your long term strategy? So, if your strategy is next 5, 10, 15, 100 years, and your execution which is the next 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 days, you need something in the middle, which is a little bit more tactical in nature, so maybe next 12 to 18 months,
Right.
where you can make judgment calls about how you will run the business so that it stays aligned with the overall strategy of the company,
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time make sure that the company is making money, that
Of
dollars are
course.
coming in,
Yep.
that you don't run out of cash, because one of the cardinal sins in business is that you never want to run out of cash.
Yep.
So you want to do your sales and operations in a way that it remains consistent, if not 100%, then at least largely consistent with your strategic vision. And at the same time, it's close enough to the execution that you are able to make money and survive. And even if you have to take a shortcut today, you
Right.
live to again align yourself with the strategy tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's very important. If you don't have it at all, maybe the near term firefighting will just take over. And very soon you will be nothing like what you intended to be. And certainly then once a year you could come around and try to align yourself. But sales
Sure.
and operations planning process kind of forces a company to do this on a routine basis, typically once a month. And that's why it's very important is that it makes sure there's alignment between your day to day and your long term.
Sure. Completely understood. Thank you. Great answer. When you're talking about implementing this S&OP, there are steps, I imagine. Can you go through some of those steps that you've seen?
Well, typically the S&OP is implemented in both technical steps and procedural steps. So the technical steps, actually, you mentioned very briefly in the beginning of this conversation. You're understanding the demand, understanding the inventory,
Right.
creating a routine demand planning process, balancing the supply and demand, and then have the S&OP itself. Now, If you have those technical pieces available, whether you do them in Excel or some external tool,
Right.
then you have the data and the calculations and the engines and the models available for you to do the S&OP. But now, in the final step, you need some procedural steps. How often will you meet? Who will be the people who will meet who will come together in these S&OP meetings? Who is the chairperson of these meetings, this sales and operations planning meeting? Who is the coordinator? Who takes the notes? How much time is focused on the past? How much time is focused on the present? And how much time is present focused on the future?
Right.
For example, we would say no more than 15 minutes on the past, no more than 15 minutes on the here and now, and majority of the time, 30 to 45 minutes to 1 hour on the future, because S&OP is a future-oriented process. So
Right.
um, then are you going to have pre-S&OP meetings for demand and pre-S&OP meeting for supply? Are you going to have different meetings for the different regions, different business units? Is there a final meeting depending on how large your company is and how many business units there are? Is there a final meeting that brings everything together? So a lot of these are procedural elements of the S&OP, and they need to be discussed and decided, obviously, and they are very different for different companies. And to enable this, um, you may also need technical pieces. For example, all the other planning is very detail oriented, number crunching oriented. I call it the Excel, Microsoft Excel view of the world.
Right.
But by the time you're doing your S&OP, you're dealing with the executives who may not be interested in looking at a model's result in a very detailed level. They might be interested in a dashboard, a KPI, a trend line that tells them where the market is headed. And so there's potentially an element of the technology piece as well. So all the technical pieces discussed earlier, plus a little bit of technology around
Sure.
dashboarding, reporting, and so on, and then all those procedural elements about when should we meet, who should be meeting, who will lead the meeting, how we will actually not just discuss but make decisions. Those are all elements of the S&OP implementation.
Excellent. You think there are any common pitfalls that you've encountered when organizations are implementing S&OP?
Yeah, I think it's any company that is slowly growing, especially when they are still relatively small. There's definitely a great tendency to be firefighters. People get actually rewarded for doing a good job in fighting a particular fire. So culturally, very often there is a lot of emphasis on mitigating the fire of that day. That means that the S&OP process itself has that as a danger, that company will remain in a very execution, a firefighting kind of mode. And that's a
Right.
very common pitfall. The other one is, just to name it, find one from the other side, is sometimes companies have these nice meetings, they have the meetings, they have the discussions, the data is
Yep.
presented, but no decisions get made about what will be done, and executives walk away, and then the decisions are left to the planners, and they do the best that they can. So that would be from the other side. So if on one end there's too much firefighting, on the other end there's nothing, no decision being made, everything is just left back to the people who are doing the day to day. Neither of them are very good, of course. So those are two very
Sure.
common ones that I have seen.
Great. Good. Are you seeing any trends influencing S&OP implementations today, like like automation, AI, sustainability?
I would start with the name itself. I mean, these days people very often do not use S&OP, sales and operations planning. They want to use the modern cousin, integrated business planning, or IBP, which there are maybe some differences as well. Maybe there is more emphasis on the financial element, but at the core, it remains a decision-making process for the business. So it's very similar. Um, with respect to the other things that you mentioned, certainly sustainability is a factor. People want to bring in sustainability related data. In particular, there are industries where it's more important than others, and they're talking about that. Certainly, in industries we work with, chemical industry, people are
Hmm.
very interested in the sustainability and the footprint and so on. Um, The anything that can be helped can help the process to run faster, be it automation, be it AI. Those are elements that are being discussed just as part of the S&OP process itself. But then
Right.
further from there, it's also being discussed in terms of how can it make the business deliver to the customers in a better way. So those are all elements that are being discussed.
Sure.
And it's a living process. So as time goes on, I'm sure new things will get added to it.
Excellent. Do you think your S&OP process needs to be refreshed occasionally?
Needs to be, excuse me, what?
Refreshed?
The
Do you need to?
process itself?
Yeah.
Well, one thing we have seen is that S&OP process is an enemy of itself. And here's
Huh.
what I mean by that. Over time, as the S&OP becomes more and more successful, if the if there are no fires to fight, no trouble in the supply chain, things are working very well, then certainly there
Mhm.
is a tendency to say, hey, if we miss one meeting, no big deal.
Right.
And one meeting then becomes two, two becomes four, and soon you go down to not having an S&OP meeting. Many companies, you will see that they reinvent their S&OP every few years. They will call it PSYOP or IBP or
Right.
some other name because they have tried it in the past, maybe successful, maybe not so. Eventually, it died down, and then it needs to be revisited. And
Yep.
whenever you revisit, you probably give it a new name, or maybe there's a new executive from some other company who restarts the process, and then it gets a new name. So
Sure.
I think it's a like anything else. If anything else that is a self-improvement type of process, one has to remain vigilant. That
Right.
as soon as you see some improvement, you don't stop exercising, for example. You make it
Right.
into a lifestyle. You keep working at it. So it's like that. And yes, indeed, organizations need to be very aware and alert to the possibility that this process can die out if we don't put energy into it.
Understood. I we did receive a couple of questions here from the studio. I'm gonna shoot them over your way here. Let's see. In markets with rapidly changing external conditions, such as geopolitical risks or price volatility, how can S&OP integrate external data to make more informed decisions? Good question.
Yeah, I would answer this in two parts. One is the preparedness, and one is
Hmm.
then actually based on what is happening right now. So if we look at the preparedness element of it, the with as you said, rapidly changing. There's no way to predict exactly what will happen.
Sure.
So the key in the S&OP process is what we call what if scenarios. And one needs to evaluate as a practice and as a habit number of scenarios that could happen, right? So I
Yep.
think there could be a war breaking out in Europe. Okay.
Sure.
Well, I don't know exactly which country will attack which country and what the war will look like. So precise data is probably not available. But I could go ahead and evaluate a scenario where it says, what if a war breaks out, between two countries, and these are the types of disruptions we will get. So now you have done the dry run, if you will, a practice run, and next time, if something like that happens, even if it will not be exactly the same, it will somewhat be the same, and then you are able to react to it. So that's the preparation part. Then, to your point, again, it's changing rapidly. So you need to be tuned into external data points, external providers of the types of data, so
Right.
that you can get an early warning as soon as things begins to happen. You get that, and you then say, okay, now I have that practiced scenario, let me tweak it a little bit, and then go to work with that. So both elements, the preparation, which requires a lot of what if scenarios, and then
Yep.
integration into external data sources to get the feed as quickly as you possibly can, is very helpful.
Great. And then I have one more. This is going to be our last question at this time. For businesses operating globally, how do you ensure your S&OP process remain aligned across regions, considering the differences in local markets, regulations, and supply chain structures? That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as the questioner pointed out, the different regions have different factors at play. And so Having only one big S&OP meeting may not do justice to all the regions. So what most companies do is they would have regional S&OP meetings where they will discuss the regional questions and make regional decisions. And then they will dial it into the global S&OP meeting where they will bring out these different decisions and kind of get a final agreement at the global level. Because if you move product from this region to that region, both regions need to agree that this movement should happen. A key tool in facilitating this can be a supply model, which is the fourth step in the five-step process that you
Right.
described earlier, the balancing supply and demand. So if you have a global model, you can see that if demand is heavy in one region, how does that impact the other regions?
Right.
And you can then use that to drive your S&OP process.
Fantastic. Listen, Sujit, we're starting to run out of time here. I wanted to thank you for joining us today and concluding this 5-part series. Really appreciate your time and all the information as a subject matter expert that you're able to share with our audience. So thank you.
You're welcome. Great to be able to talk about it.
It is, isn't it?
Yep.
Anybody, I just want to remind you one more time, if you follow the QR code on your screen, you'll go right to the Arkiva website and you'll learn a little bit more about S&OP management and the information that you're seeking about our company. So thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to our next LinkedIn Live. Thanks, Sujit.
Thank you.